I'm not sure I'm going to be able to hold up that elaborate handshake thing with every speaker who comes on stage, but if I was, I would give the next one a high five. She's a leading expert when it comes to challenges and dangers posed by climate change. And as such, she says herself, she's extremely busy and restless, trying to convince people to do more, faster, and harder. But she also believes that nature itself is the best teacher, which is why she works not only as a sustainability professor, but she has also founded the Arctic Basecamp initiative, where she leads scientists and politicians into the Arctic. And as the saying goes, what happens in the Arctic will definitely not stay in the Arctic. Here to confront us with the grim realities of why the vanishing ice is literally just the tip of the iceberg. Please welcome our opening speaker, and she has a little sneak peek for us that she brought. Please give it up for Gail Whiteman.
This is an alarm call. An urgent warning coming straight to you. An alarm call sounding for cities facing wildfires, blazing heat, and unbearable droughts. Because the world has never been this warm in more than 2,000 years. An alarm call sounding for cities underwater, capitals and headquarters displaced, factories shut, freight and transport brought to a halt. Because the sea levels are rising faster than they have in over 3,000 years. An alarm call sounding for economies in recession, shortages of food and water, mass protests, mass migrations, and conflicts over resources. This is a warning cry of global risks coming from the north, where this change is happening now. This is a cry for help from a region where land is reclaimed by the sea, where communities are displaced and forced to change their way of life. This is a warning cry from the place that affects the life you know, the life we know, the life everyone knows. This is the cry of the Arctic.
Hello, everybody. I have to say a special thank you to Eric for starting off, because I have to say I enjoyed all the happiness, all the joy, all the playfulness, and now you're going to get the reality check. So if you take me for dinner, I can be Dr. Doom and Gloom, but at the same time, I do have to tell you the truth. 2023 was the hottest year on record. We actually breached the 1.5 degree warmer world temporarily this year. We know that the Arctic is actually warming up to 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. It is ground zero for climate change. But the Arctic is actually throwing back feedback to us. It's actually creating so many of the global risks around the world that we are now experiencing. If we take a look at the Arctic ice, we know that we've lost about 40% since 1970, since the records began. Now, if we actually look at that in terms of extent, so that's how broad it is, that's 40%. But if we look in terms of volume, that number ratchets up to about 75%. Now, why should we care? Well, of course, polar bears care and we care about them. But actually, the Arctic ice is one of the world's most important insurance policies against runaway climate change. And if you've lost 75% of your insurance policy, that's a warning call. Now, it's not the only climate tipping point that's in trouble in the Arctic region. What we also see are things like the frozen land through the Arctic region, through the tundra, Permafrost, which used to be permanently frozen, hence the name, is actually no longer frozen as much as it used to be. Why is that a problem? It's because underneath that permafrost is carbon. And there's so much carbon, there's about 2 times the degree of carbon that's already in the atmosphere in that previously frozen Earth. What's happening is we see here big holes are showing up on land in Siberia, and we also see methane bubbling up through the sea, in the subsea strata. So that's another climate tipping point, but it's not the only one. In the polar region, if we take a look at the ice sheets, both in Greenland and in Antarctic, we can see that the track on that is also in the wrong direction. The Greenland ice sheet now has locked-in melt that will cause sea level rise of 24 centimeters this century. That's even if we stopped CO2 emissions today or yesterday. 24 centimeters, is that a lot from now until the end of the century? It absolutely, certainly is, particularly since governments around the world are absolutely not planning for this. It's not in the models, and there is no adaptation plan that's on the table for this. The sleeping giant of the West Antarctic ice sheet is now woken up. It used to be the stable place of all that big white, another insurance policy, and it is now also kicking off. The Arctic and the Antarctic are in trouble. Now, what does that mean for us if we take a look at the vanishing ice? And this is a photo that I took when I was in Greenland with Rainn Wilson, who was the voiceover in the video that I just played. Now, when we sit there and we actually look at the ice, what do we see? Well, we see a magnificent place. And we're awed by the beauty. But importantly, it actually tells us 4 things that are relevant for the challenges that we face. The first is that the way we have built our economies and our societies is toxic and it's destructive. It has given us a lot, particularly in the developed world, but what it has started to do is melt the Arctic, melt the Antarctic, which are causing extreme weather events everywhere. Now they're causing it in very vulnerable places around the world, like Asia, African continent, Latin America, parts of the US, parts of Canada, parts of Europe, particularly where vulnerable people do not have the ability to buffer or resist or move away. On top of that, we build plans like the SDGs, which look wonderful. They're a direction post that have lots of celebration. I just came from the UN meetings in New York. And what we're seeing is that those are also on thin ice. There is absolutely no way that we will be able to, as a world, reach the SDGs unless we stabilize the polar ice. Now, I'm a social scientist, so I'm coming here to you to talk about global risk. My expertise is in sense making. How do we actually make sense of environmental change? Now, when we make sense, it's a well-defined social science theory. We try to take a flux in from the world, and we make sense of that on an individual basis. What we see, though, is that the world has become increasingly denatured. Most of us are really good at social sense-making, and I think Eric, again, did a very good job of giving us a secret handshake or a secret way that we could talk to people. But we do know largely how to do that. But if we add in a volatile world, the way we make sense, the way we understand it, which has been built on the Holocene, which is a period of incredible environmental stability over the last 10,000 years, our sense-making struggles. We do not pay attention to the weather unless it's nice, and it is a beautiful day in Stockholm, or if it's going to be bad, and somehow we have to do something in response to that. But the problem is with an Earth system that is moving into volatile, nonlinear change, which is where we are now, is that those shocks are going to come fast and furious, and we still have to pay attention to those small changes. Now, most of us do not pay attention to the Arctic ice. We do not know what happened this September. Every September is the minimum. We think, oh, it's melting. We hear it in the news. But we don't understand the degree of risks that are coming to us. So one of the biggest lessons the Arctic ice and the vanishing ice tell us is that we actually have to become ecological sense makers. So as we make sense of our daily life, of our organizational life, and as our national and international collective lives, we have to bring in that environmental understanding and have that shape the decisions that we make. Now, importantly, and again, I showed you a lot of things that were worrying at the beginning. The Inner Development Goals talk a lot about courage, and it is something that I've been working in for a long time. Now, I'm not a Navy SEAL, I'm not a professional athlete, I'm just actually somebody that's had to go beyond my own comfort zone in a lot of ways on a daily basis and sometimes on a larger basis. And if there is one thing I think the Arctic ice teaches us, and that is that we need to find courage. We have incomplete knowledge, we have incomplete relationships, we have incomplete technology, and we most certainly have incomplete skills. But what we do have is human connection and the ability to dig deep and to come together and to actually face what is, without question, an existential threat. Now, I want you to think about your goals for yourself and your family in the next year. I want you to think about what you would like your children to do in 10 years. I don't mean the end of the century, 10 years. And as you hold that, I want you to really understand that if we do not stabilize the polar regions, if we do not stabilize the Arctic ice on sea, on land, we cannot reach any of those things. And when we talk about inner development, I do think that actually we have to rephrase that. There seems to be a dichotomy between external development, which is a lot of busy people, I'm one of them, doing those things, right? Focusing on what needs to be done. And then we do have to do more of the inner development, and that I agree with. But both of those are often denatured. Both of those forget the Arctic ice, or the Amazon, or the Congo, which are other great big carbon sinks. What we tend to do is that we separate ourselves, and we come in rooms, and they do have good dynamics, and I can show a video. But out there, the natural systems are performing hope for us every single day. And for most of us, our sense-making uses that in our leisure time. I do too. But that actually is the only time there is. So when we take a look at inner development goals, we have to remember the sustainable development goals. We're doing inner development in my opinion, in order to create a safe space for humanity. The SDGs are on thin ice, but so are the IDGs. And as we spend the next few days considering how we can improve ourselves, how can we face the ego that we all have, and we all have that in the environmental movement as well, And actually, with incomplete knowledge, incomplete technology, incomplete collaborations, and incomplete skills, come together and cross the divide and bridge the gap between what's happening in the Arctic, what's happening in the polar regions, and what's happening inside us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gail. You said that if we were to go for dinner, you would also do the doom and gloom over dinner.
I'm great at that.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
But would you also...
And the people do take me for dinner, so it does
They
happen.
still do take you for dinner.
Sometimes
Okay.
it's a repeat dinner, not always, but yeah.
But what would you tell us over dinner about hope?
Oh, hope. Well, I know you might think that I'm going to say it's hopeless. I'm not going to say that. It is totally not hopeless. First of all, there's a lot of great technologies out there. There's a lot of great people, a lot of great innovation, a lot of great networks that are working together. So the movement is strong, and perhaps stronger than it has been for a long time. There are also forces against us, particularly misinformation and vested interests. But I would say for me that hope comes from performing action. And when I look at nature, and I really did this because when I was at the UN meetings in Dubai last year, where I actually also got sick, so it was interesting. It must be related to these moments in time. I felt we're not going to make it, and that was one of the first times I do that because I tend to be a glass half full type of person, and I thought, what can I do? And I thought, you know what allows me to see the reality and then move through that in a cathartic way. And I thought about the performing arts. And I thought about the fact that nature every day performs hope. So if you walk down the street and you see weeds coming up on the sidewalk, the weed isn't saying, am I going to fix this asphalt, get rid of it? The weed is just doing what it does. So nature performs hope for us every day, and so do the performing arts. And how do we get that energy back? And I think that's by just acting and trying and collaborating and bringing all these things together. So that's what I do. I'm sort of relentlessly hopeful.
I love that. Thank you so much for bringing that hope to the summit as well. Thank you so much. Please give it up for Gail Whiteman.